Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. I recently unboxed this from AussieSapphire. It's a very cheap portable trim saw, and today I want to go through more of a walkthrough on how to slice with the trim saw. So you can see we've got a multitude of blades. The electroplated I'm not going to use. Sintered diamond is the way to go, and it's a fairly thin one you can see there, but I've also got a thicker one which came with the saw. Now there's no reason to really upgrade to the really thin blade unless you want to just save material. If you're slabbing up a lot of stuff, then it's not too much of a problem. Just go for the thick one. It'll allow you to push a lot harder and it's a lot more forgiving, but the thinner one can bend a little bit, so you just got to be a little bit careful, but it will save a lot of material. You lose quite a bit, as we'll show later on. Now installing the blade is pretty easy. Whip off the nut. Take everything off the arbor of the motor. It's just a couple of flanges. There's an internal and an external. We'll go through all of that in just a moment. So taking all of that off, we're going to look at this inner flange. Now this is probably the most important one. Everything's important, but this is the most important because this one is also a bit of an adapter. So the arbor itself doesn't change size, as you can see, but the inner flange will help you load up any disc that you really need. They typically only come in a few sizes. So here, the most common two, you can see I've got the smaller one there, so I've got to make sure that the inner flange is facing outwards with the correct size on the outer edge. So that's going to pop straight back on, and then we can load up the saw blade after that, and then chuck on the outer flange and clamp it in place. So the inner blade, just make sure it's spinning the correct way. Typically these blades will spin towards you, and that's because you're going to be pushing towards it when you're cutting. I don't think I've ever used one that goes in the opposite direction. So you just want to make sure that the arrow is pointing in the right direction, and then you just want to chuck on this outer flange and nut. So the outer flange, at this point, this is the most important thing. You've got to make sure that the blade is sitting in its correct position. It is so easy to misalign that. I've seen it happen a lot of times, and then if you just flick on the switch, you end up just absolutely warping your blade against the edge of the machine. Really not good, so I always do manual turns of the blade at almost every stage. You'll see it throughout the video constantly. I just do it without even thinking about it these days. Now in this little storage area here, you can see I've got the little spanner. Now we're only going a little bit past finger tight. We don't want to over tighten this. Don't smack it, don't crank it. It's really, really light. The blade won't slip too much at all, and if it does, you can always tighten it a little bit. Give it some manual spins, you'll be right. Close it all up, and we'll have a look at a few of the other parts. Before turning on the system, we're going to chuck on basically anything to protect your ears and your eyes. Anytime something is spinning, you've got to make sure your eyes are protected. It takes a tiny little thing to just shoot straight through your eye, and you're in a world of pain and a lot of trouble. Now the ears, it's not too bad. This saw is actually really quiet. It's a very small induction motor, so it's not too bad. And then I'm just checking to make sure that the side plate has a bit of clearance, because I want to be able to fill the water with it open. This won't go for all trim saws. Some are if you've got a loose flap or something, you can very easily smack it into the blade, so you've got to be careful. And then I've just turned it on and we're just adding water. You can typically get about the right amount if you fill the water up to just past the bottom edge of the blade. It's only maybe 2-3 mils up the blade. When you look at the sintered diamond blade, even that sintered diamond section of it, you don't even need to fill past that. It's a really tiny amount, and you just want to get a nice little mist, as you can see on my hand. It's a very small amount of water, and you can always add more. Now I've just turned it off and closed it up, and we're going to install the blade guard. I don't like doing that while it's powered on. So this one is really tight, and that's not a bad thing. It means it is very sturdy and it's in perfect alignment with the blade. The most important thing about these blade guards, and something that I find a massive issue on other cheap models, is that they are never aligned very well with the blade. This is the first portable kind of style trim saw that I've used where the alignment is spot on. So you have no problem pushing a thin slab all the way through and shooting it past that blade guard. It will be perfectly in line with your blade. The only trick is that the thinner blade is going to make it a little bit of a tighter squeeze. So if you want to go all the way past the blade guard, you're going to want to go for the thicker blade, which really is not a huge problem. If you're doing that kind of hardcore cutting with the thicker slabs and you're doing a bunch of slabbing like I will later in the video, then you want to be using that thicker blade anyway, most likely. Now installing the rip guide. So this is the rip guide. It's got two little clips, but it's also got a little bit of a bumpy section on the top and bottom and a nice handy ruler guide. So you can clip it in place, and if you want to move it slightly one way or the other, because you can see here I've loaded it slightly crooked, you can just click it off, and then it's got a nice little friction grip so that you can really settle in and lock in the position quite well. As you can see here, you can reposition it, and it provides a lot of friction, so it's very easy to precisely position this exactly where you want. It doesn't just slide freely one way or the other. Now remember that this is a trim saw, not a slabbing saw. So with really thick pieces, like you can see here, this fairy opal chunk, this trim saw is not big enough for it. I will have to move the blade guard so that it gives a bit more clearance. But even in doing that, when I try to push it through, it's gonna still clash. So I would actually have to cut without the guard on it. If I wanted to get through something like this, it would just not cut all the way through, and then I'd have to flip it. And then you've got to match up your two cuts, and it's an absolute nightmare. So it's not designed for real thick ones, but if you've just already got some stuff slabbed up, or you're just trimming up a little bit of rough and getting rid of a lot of the material you don't want, you can easily do that with this. So here you can see I've already marked up a couple of bits. This is one that I used in the original video of the unboxing. And here you just want to make sure that the water just flicks onto the stone nicely. That means you've got enough water in there. And when you're pushing the stone, your pushing is not what's cutting the stone at all. It will be smooth as butter, just don't push it. If you see the blade deflecting at all, you've got to stop and calm down. You've got to push it a lot slower. Really, you're barely even pushing. Here I went super slowly just to emphasize the point. You can go much faster than that as long as your blade is in pretty good condition. But you can see here, it gets through very well and keeps everything nice and wet. Doing a second cut, you just want to push it very gently. I go a little bit faster on this one, and just make sure that the blade doesn't deflect anywhere. It's perfectly fine. Super smooth. I really do like this blade, and having used this machine a little bit more now, it works on so many good materials. I really have no problem at all with it. And this isn't even a sponsored video. And here I'm showing off a failed slice that I did on another saw. It was just I think it's a Ryobi. And I just cut it now with the thinner blade instead of the tile blade, which is how I started the cut on the previous machine. And you can see there's a lot of material to be saved by using the thinner blade. Of course, it's got its pros and cons like we mentioned, but it does do a really good job. And if you can use it, I would. We've got a miter guide. This is a couple of the things that I probably won't really use, but we'll go over them just because they do come in the kit. And you know what, there could be someone out there that needs it. So the miter guide just sets your angle. You can see here, easily changes anywhere from 0 to 45 in both directions. So you just wind it back down, lock it in place. I'll set it back to 45. Wind it out, lock it in place, and then it literally just slides straight on to your rip guide. And there you go, it just slides up and down nicely. I'm not sure I would ever use this at all, like I said, but you know what, it's there and it does have a function, so it's a nice, handy thing to have. Beautiful demonstration of what it's actually doing with that slab. Now, the left side of this machine is actually an adjustable bevel block. So you can do a beveled cut at 15, 30 and 45 degrees, and it just works with these little flaps that go down. Once again, I'm probably not going to use this. I don't really see when I would need it for what I do, but it's there and it's pretty sturdy. I was quite surprised with how sturdy it is, especially at the 45 degree. It's got an extra support there. And I suppose if you're looking at it, the cut is going to come in at an angle. So instead of getting a thinner slab here, you could actually end up cheating and getting a longer slab in comparison. I guess that's one use for it, but it's a little bit tricky to use in practice and probably not worth that effort. It's better just to get a bigger saw for that. So just repositioning it into the 30-degree angle. It's quite sturdy. Especially if you're pushing down. You can't push up on it, of course, but if you're pushing down, it'll be perfectly fine. And then the 15 is probably one of the more stable ones, apart from the 45. And of course, handy little storage for the spanner, which is real good. Now, cleaning up. Unplug. Always good to unplug. I mean, it's pretty hard to accidentally turn this unit on, but I do it anyway. Yank that out. The guard, as you can see, it took quite a bit of force, and we're just going to go through and clean everything up. A lot of the plastic parts like this, you don't need to worry about it too much, but it's typically just the blade and a lot of the metal parts, especially over time when they start getting scratched, it will promote a little bit of corrosion. So we're getting the little spanner back out, and as you can see, it was barely tightened, so it just takes a little pinch and it comes off. I always take my blade out. And then here you can see the drain hole that's built in. This is not my favorite feature of this one. I prefer to have like a little bit of a bung style and have a hole that's right near the bottom, because you can see I'm having to really tip this one to encourage the water to come out. At least this one doesn't need any kind of stopper or anything, so that's a plus. But I would prefer something that's right on the bottom and has something that you remove to expose a hole. And then just going to wipe it all over, dry it all up, make sure the blade's nice and clean. If the blade isn't clean, you can just run it quickly and chuck it up against a aluminium oxide block like the ones I sell on the website, and just nip into the corner of those. You don't need to cut all the way through or anything, just nip the corners and it'll clean up any of the mud on the outside and resharpen your blade. You can see on the bottom there's the little holder for the rip guide, so it just clips in underneath. This unit is super compact with its little handle. You can just pick it up and go wherever. Cable, just bundle that up, and it's even got a little holder section for that. So don't need to worry about that getting all tangled and turned into a mess. It just goes right in under this black plastic flap. And then always just grabbing it by the handle and flipping it around. Inside the water compartment, you can now just store all your other little bits and pieces. If you're going to use the miter guide, chuck it in there. I'd always chuck the guard in there. Some people will chuck everything in there. I've seen some wild people store some wild things in their trim saw units. So I don't do that, but I know other people do. Even all of these blades and everything can go in there. So you can pack those up and bundle them all together. You want to be careful with chucking too much stuff in there though, because you want to protect that motor arbor as much as possible. And here you can see you could actually start putting some pressure on it and causing some damage. So be careful of that one. That's why I don't typically chuck a lot of stuff in there. You just want to keep that one nice and safe. You don't want it warped, because then everything's going to be out of line. But apart from that, just keep your flanges back on there. There's no point having those rattling around. Just chuck them back on, finger tight, nut back on, and you're pretty much good to go. Whip it out when you need, pack it up when you don't need it. It's a super portable unit and super handy for $200. I don't think I've spent a better $200 in the last 5 years. It's really good. Thumbs up from me.